When your own mother introduces you to her friends as my daughter, the one who's still figuring things out, you learn to smile a certain way. Not with your eyes, just the corners of your mouth. Enough to pass. That night, at my brother's rehearsal dinner, I had perfected that smile. I could hold it through anything. The restaurant was in Napa Valley, the kind of place where the bread costs $12 and nobody blinks. My mother had chosen it, of course. She always chose places that announced something. The centerpieces were fresh peonies. The menus were leather-bound. My brother Nathan stood at the head of the table in a navy blazer, laughing his easy laugh, one arm around his fiancée Brooke, the other gesturing towards some story about his latest acquisition. Everyone was watching him the way people always watched Nathan, like he was a fireplace in a cold room. I sat near the end of the table. Not the very end. My mother would never seat me at the very end. That would be too obvious. But close enough. My father raised his glass before the appetizers arrived. To Nathan and Brooke, he said, and to the kind of future this family has always built. Slow, steady, and with both feet on the ground. Everyone clinked. I lifted mine too. My aunt leaned over to me as the glasses came down. So, sweetheart, she said, lowering her voice the way people do when they're trying to be delicate. Are you still doing that? What is it, the food thing? The food thing. I had a name for it. I had a James Beard Award nomination for it. But in this family, my restaurant was the food thing, and my brother's commercial real estate portfolio was Nathan's work. I nodded. Still doing the food thing. She patted my hand. Well, it keeps you busy, I'm sure. My mother was watching from across the table. Not intervening. Just watching, the way she always did. Like a referee who had already decided which team she was rooting for. Nathan caught my eye across the centerpiece and gave me a quick smile. It was genuine. Nathan's smiles usually were. He had never been cruel, not intentionally. He just occupied so much of the room that the rest of us existed in his periphery. The Golden Son. Medical school graduate turned real estate developer. Somehow both things made sense for him. The way everything made sense for him. The entrees came. My father was talking about a property deal, some new development in Sacramento going up in the spring. Nathan was nodding, asking the right questions. I cut my duck confit and thought about the sauce I'd been testing for 2 weeks back at the restaurant. Sherry reduction, a little too acidic still. I needed to pull it earlier. Then my father's attention landed on me, the way it always did eventually, like a spotlight nobody wanted. So Vivienne, he said, my name in his mouth always sounded like a question. Are you still at that same place in Oakland? Yes, I said. Alma. He nodded slowly, the same nod he gave to things he had already decided weren't worth investing in. And businesses. He paused. Sustainable? It's growing, I said. He made a sound. Not a word, just a sound. Then, I read something about the restaurant industry the other day. 90% failure rate in the first 5 years. Something like that. 60%, I said, and we're in year 4. Well, he said, setting down his fork. I suppose as long as you enjoy it. Not everything needs to be scalable. Nathan jumped in then, redirecting, bringing up something about Brooke's family's vineyard, and the conversation moved on. But the word sat on the table between us. Scalable. It was his favorite way to measure whether something mattered. I looked down at my plate. I had opened Alma 3.5 years earlier with my own savings, a loan from a friend, and one credit card I didn't fully pay off for 18 months. It was a 40-seat restaurant in the Temescal neighborhood of Oakland, California, a neighborhood my father had referred to as up-and-coming, in a tone that meant he didn't trust it. We did a prix-fixe tasting menu on weekends, a la carte Tuesday through Friday. I had named it after my grandmother on my mother's side. The woman who taught me that food was how you told people they mattered, what my family didn't know, what I had not told them, because the few times I had tried to share anything about the restaurant they had glazed over within 30 seconds, was that Alma had been nominated for a James Beard Award for Best New Restaurant 6 weeks earlier. The announcement was scheduled for the following Tuesday. I had not told them. I had sat with it alone for 6 weeks, turning it over like a stone in my pocket, feeling the weight of it. Not because I was afraid it wasn't real, but because I had learned, somewhere between years of being the food thing daughter, that sharing things I cared about with this family was how those things got smaller. So I kept it. And I smiled. And I cut my duck confit. And I thought about the sherry reduction. Outside, the Napa evening was warm and still. Through the restaurant window, I could see the vineyard rows running in clean lines toward the dark hills. Everything orderly, everything as expected. My phone buzzed in my clutch. I ignored it. It buzzed again. My mother caught my eye across the table and gave me a look. I left it. By the time dessert arrived, my father had circled back to me one more time, unprompted. He was 3 glasses of Cabernet in, which was when he got gentle in the particular way that was worse than his directness. "You know, Vivienne," he said, "I admire what you're doing." "I do. It takes guts to run a small business. Your grandfather would have appreciated that." I looked at him. He continued, "I just wonder sometimes if the energy you put into that kitchen might be better spent in something with more." He searched for the word ceiling. "You're smart. You always were. You could have done anything. I could have done anything." As though what I had done didn't count. I set down my spoon. "Thank you," I said. "That means a lot." He nodded, satisfied the way he always was when he thought he'd helped. Under the table, my hand found my phone. The notification was from my publicist. The subject line was 3 words. "Call me now." I excused myself before the coffee arrived. "Fresh air," I said, and nobody questioned it because they were used to me disappearing. Outside, the valet stand was quiet. I walked past it to the side of the building and called her back. "Viv," she said before I could speak. The Times ran it early. The San Francisco Chronicle just picked it up. It's everywhere. I'd been trying to reach you for an hour. I pressed my back against the building wall. "What are you talking about?" "The Michelin announcement," she said. "They moved it up. Alma got the star." I stood there in the dark for a moment. The vineyard rows were invisible now, just a smell of damp earth and something sweet. "I know we weren't expecting it tonight," she continued. "But it gets better. I just got off the phone with the producer at CBS Mornings. They want you tomorrow, and the James Beard people called. Apparently this combination, a Michelin star and the Best New Restaurant nomination in the same season, it hasn't happened to a Bay Area restaurant in 11 years. I exhaled. "Go back in," she said. "Or don't. But tomorrow is going to be loud." I hung up and stood there for another minute, the warm night air. The distant sound of the party inside. My father's voice in my head. Not everything needs to be scalable. I looked through the window at the table. My brother was feeding Brooke a bite of something. My mother was laughing at whatever my aunt said. My father was comfortable and certain, the way he always was, the unchallenged authority on what mattered and what didn't. I went back inside. I sat down. I finished my coffee. I smiled that smile. And I said nothing. The drive back to Oakland took almost 2 hours. I put on nothing. No music, no podcast, just the highway and the dark and the occasional flash of other headlights. My phone started going off around the time I crossed the Bay Bridge. By the time I parked outside my apartment, I had 47 notifications. I sat in my car and scrolled through them. The Chronicle headline, "Alma Restaurant Earns Michelin Star, First in Oakland's Temescal in a Decade." Eater SF had picked it up, then Eater National, then something from the Mirror Times dining section that made my throat close for a second. Just the first line. "A quiet 40-seat restaurant in East Oakland is having the kind of season that happens once in a generation." I put my phone face down on the passenger seat and sat with it. I had not cried when I opened Alma. I had not cried during the year when I worked doubles 6 days a week and paid my sous chefs before I paid my own rent. I had not cried when we got our first 4-star review, or when we sold out every weekend for 3 months straight, or when I stood in my walk-in cooler at midnight after service and thought, for the first time, this is actually working. I cried a little in the car outside my apartment. Not from joy, exactly, from something older and harder to name. The kind of feeling that comes when you finally get the thing you've been reaching for in secret, and the first emotion isn't celebration. It's something like, "I told you so." Directed at no one. Directed at everyone. I went inside. I made tea. I sat at my kitchen table and answered the publicist's email. Then I wrote back to the CBS Mornings producer. Then I called my executive chef, Marcus, because he deserved to hear it from me before he woke up to it. He picked up on the second ring and said nothing for a full 4 seconds when I told him. Then Viv, then nothing again. Then, okay. I laughed. I know. We talked for 20 minutes about logistics. He had the early crew coming in at 7. We'd need to brief the whole team before service. I told him I'd be there by 6:30. After I hung up, I looked at my phone for a long time. There were a dozen texts I hadn't opened yet. Old culinary school friends. My investor. My landlord, which was unexpected. A food writer I'd done an interview with 2 years ago. There was also a text from my mother, sent at 11:48 p.m. Saw something online about your restaurant. Is it true? Call me. I read it twice. Not congratulations. Not, I'm so proud of you. Not even a question mark that conveyed excitement. Just, is it true? I set my phone down and drank my tea. The next 72 hours were not something I can describe in a straight line because they didn't happen in a straight line. They happened in all directions at once. CBS Mornings flew me to New York on 40 hours' notice. I did the segment in a kitchen they built on set, and the host kept calling me Chef Vivienne with this particular reverence that still felt strange on my skin. Back in Oakland, Marcus ran service both nights without me, and he sent me a voice memo after the second night that just said, packed both nights, had to turn away 30 covers, staff is incredible, we're good. I played that memo 3 times on the flight home. The James Beard Foundation called to confirm my nomination. Officially in writing, Best New Restaurant, and this was new, I hadn't known this part was coming. Best Chef, California. I read that email sitting in the United Terminal at JFK with a lukewarm coffee and my carry-on between my feet, and I had to read it twice because the second award hadn't been mentioned before. My publicist texted, they're calling you the chef who came out of nowhere. I wrote back, I've been there for 4 years. She replied, that's the story, babe. I called my grandmother that afternoon from a cab on the way to the airport. She was 81 and still sharp. Still made tamales every Christmas. Still called me Mija even though she knew it embarrassed me in front of people. I told her about the star. About the James Beard nominations. She was quiet for a moment and then she said, in Spanish, I always knew. I always knew it was going to be you. My grandmother knew. My culinary school professors knew. My staff had believed since before I did. The investors who took a chance on Alma had believed. My family had not. That was the thing I kept turning over. Not with bitterness, exactly. More with a kind of tired clarity. The people who knew me least had decided earliest what I was capable of. My mother called 3 more times before I landed back in Oakland. I didn't answer the first 2. I answered the third. Her voice had a quality I hadn't heard in it before, a kind of careful energy, like she was measuring each word. Vivienne, she said, I've been seeing everything. The segment, the articles. I know. Why didn't you tell us? About the nomination? About any of this? I thought about how to answer. I decided on the true thing. Because every time I've tried to tell you about the restaurant, it hasn't gone anywhere, I said. You changed the subject. Dad calculates whether it's scalable. It's just easier to keep things separate. She was quiet. I'm not saying it to be unkind, I said. It's just true. Your father has been showing people this CBS segment, she said finally. He sent it to his whole department. And to Uncle Bill, I laughed. Not meanly, just at the particular absurdity of it. I said, I'm glad he's proud. She hesitated. He is. We all are. I didn't say what I was thinking, which was, you didn't used to be. The James Beard Awards ceremony was in Chicago in June. The Lyric Opera House. I had been before, as an audience member, as someone who watched other people win and thought maybe, someday, walking in as a nominee was a different experience. I wore a dress I'd had made by a friend who designs out of San Francisco. Something in deep emerald green that my grandmother said made me look like money, which she meant as the highest compliment. My publicist had arranged a table. My executive chef Marcus was there, 2 of my investors. The sommelier who'd been with Alma since the first year. My front-of-house manager who cried on the cab ride over and then spent the rest of the evening pretending she hadn't. My family was not there. I had not invited them. That was a choice I had made deliberately, and I had made peace with it in the months between the Michelin announcement and the ceremony. This night was going to be what it was going to be, and I didn't want to be managing anyone else's feelings while it happened. I won Best New Restaurant. The presenter said my name, and for a second the room had that particular quality of being both very loud and very quiet at the same time. Marcus grabbed my arm. My sommelier was on her feet before I was. I walked to the stage in a room full of the best chefs in the country, and I said what I had actually prepared to say, which was not much. I thanked my team by name, every single one of them, because they had built this thing with me, and they deserved to be said aloud in this room. I thanked my grandmother. I said the name of the neighborhood, Temescal, Oakland, twice, because I wanted it on the record that this was where we came from and we were still there. I did not thank my family. Nobody noticed. Or if they did, they didn't mention it. Afterward, at the dinner, someone at another table sent over a bottle of champagne. The note said, "From one underdog to another." I never found out who sent it. I called my grandmother from the cab back to the hotel. She was awake. It was 11 p.m. in California. But she was awake. She'd been watching her phone. When I told her she had won, she made a sound I had never heard her make before, something between a laugh and something else, and she said, "Now you call your mother." I called my mother. She picked up on the first ring. "Congratulations," she said. Her voice was strange. Not strange, the bad way. Strange the way voices get when someone is feeling something large and doesn't quite know where to put it. "Thank you. We watched on the live stream," she said. "Your father found it online at 9 o'clock, and we all watched it together. You and Nathan and me and Brooke. Your father." She stopped. "He didn't say anything when they called your name. He just got up and went to the kitchen and came back with 4 glasses and a bottle of the good wine." I said nothing. "Vivienne," she said. "I think he wanted to be there." I said carefully he had the option. "I know," she said. I should have." She stopped again. "This isn't the right moment for that conversation." "It's okay," I said, and I meant it partially. We stayed on the phone for a few minutes more, and then I said goodnight and hung up, and I sat in the back of the cab watching Chicago move past the windows, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Not triumph, not vindication, something more complicated. The feeling of having proven something you never wanted to have to prove. 3 weeks after the ceremony, my father came to Oakland. He did not call ahead, or he called ahead by about 20 minutes, which was enough time for me to be at the restaurant, but not enough time for me to mentally prepare for anything. He said, "I'm in the area. I'd like to see the restaurant, if that's all right." It was a Tuesday, my day off, but I went in anyway. I found him standing outside on the sidewalk when I arrived. He was wearing what he wore when he wasn't trying, which was khakis and a fleece he'd had since at least 2008. He looked smaller than he did at the rehearsal dinner. Not physically, he was still tall, still solid, but something about his posture had shifted, like he was taking up less space on purpose. He looked at the front of the restaurant. At the window, where Marcus had put up the small, tasteful placard, James Beard Award winner, Best New Restaurant. I watched him read it. I unlocked the door and let him in. He walked through the dining room slowly. He touched the back of one of the chairs. He looked at the open kitchen, at the prep station, at the chalkboard where we'd written the week's specials. He didn't say anything for a while. I made him coffee. We sat at the bar. He wrapped his hands around the mug. "Your grandmother's name," he said. "I didn't know that's why you chose it." "I told you when I opened it," I said. Not unkindly, just factually. He nodded. Maybe I wasn't listening. He looked around the room again. "How many seats?" 40. "And you're full every night?" "Most nights now," I said. After the announcement, we had a wait list through August. He was quiet for a long moment. A truck went by outside, rattling the window slightly. "I owe you an apology," he said. He said it the way he said most difficult things. Direct. No preamble. Like ripping off the adhesive quickly was the only way he knew to do it. I looked at him. "The rehearsal dinner," he said. "And before that. For a long time before that. I spent a lot of years measuring things by a standard that made sense to me, and I applied that standard to you without," he stopped. "Without asking whether it was the right standard for what you were building." I said nothing. I let him have the space to finish. "Not everything that matters is scalable," he said. "You build something that matters. I can see that now. I can see it in that segment. I can see it in that segment. I could see it tonight, walking in here." He paused. "I should have been able to see it 4 years ago. Or 8 years ago. Or whenever you first told me you wanted to be a chef, and I asked you what your backup plan was." I remembered that conversation. I had been 19. I looked at my father, this man I had spent 20 years alternately needing approval from and building defenses against, and I tried to find the version of him that had always made me feel too small, and it was still there, but it was sitting alongside something else now, something tired, something that had been carrying its own weight for a long time. I appreciate that, I said. I mean it. He nodded. I know I'm late. You are, I agreed. But you came. He almost smiled. Your grandmother always said you were the one who would do something none of us expected. I said, she knows me better than you do. I didn't say it to wound him. I said it because it was true, and we both knew it. He nodded again slowly. I'm working on that, he said. We sat with the quiet for a while. The restaurant around us was still and clean, the way it gets on a Tuesday before anyone arrives. Something about it felt like a held breath. He stayed for another hour. I showed him the kitchen. He asked questions, real ones, not the dismissive kind, about the menu, about sourcing, about what the prefixy structure allowed me to do that a la carte wouldn't. He listened to the answers. He asked a follow-up about one of them. When he left, he hugged me on the sidewalk. A real hug, not the one-arm thing he did at family gatherings. He held on for a second longer than I expected. Drive safe, I said. He said, I'll be back. If that's all right. I said it was. The year after that was. The year after that was different. I won't pretend the conversation in the restaurant fixed everything, because it didn't. There are habits of being a family that take longer than a year to undo. My father still sometimes started sentences with, well, have you thought about, in a way that made my jaw tighten. My mother still occasionally introduced me to people with a kind of surprised pride that made it clear the surprise hadn't fully faded. My brother Nathan, to his credit, came to dinner at Alma twice with Brooke that fall and ate every course and said nothing unnecessary and left a generous tip, which was its own kind of apology. But something had shifted. Slightly. Incrementally. The way most real things shift. I kept building. We expanded our team. I hired a pastry chef who had been on a short list for her own award and who made me better by making everyone around her better. We started a monthly community dinner. First Sunday of the month, $30 prize fixie, and a portion of every ticket went to a local food bank. It started small and grew into something that surprised me. The community dinners were actually my grandmother's idea. She had come to visit in the spring, the first time she'd seen Alma, and she had walked through the dining room very slowly, touching things the way my father had, and she'd stood in the kitchen for a long time looking at everything. Then she had said, "This is a generous place. Make sure it stays that way." So we did. I got a second Michelin star 18 months after the first. I found out at 6 in the morning in bed from my phone. I lay there for a few minutes just looking at the ceiling. Then I called Marcus. Then I texted my grandmother a string of emojis that she did not understand but appreciated. Then I called my parents. My father answered. He was not a man who showed things easily, never had been. But when I told him, he said, "Vivienne," just my name, in a voice I had never heard from him before. "That's it," I said, because there was nothing else to say. He said, "I'm proud of you." He said it simply, without qualifier, without the hedge he usually put between himself and direct feeling. I said, "Thank you." And then, "I know it matters more to me that I did the work than whether you're proud of it." He was quiet. "I also know," I said, "that it still means something. That you said it." He said, "Good." And somehow that was the right answer. I think about that rehearsal dinner sometimes. My father, with his Cabernet and his words Scalable, my mother watching from across the table. My phone buzzing in my clutch with the message I didn't read until I was standing outside in the dark. I think about all the versions of myself that learned to make that smile, the one that doesn't reach your eyes, the one that costs something every time you use it. I used it for a long time. I got very good at it. I don't need it as much now. The restaurant is still 40 seats. I have thought about expanding, about a second location, about all the things that would qualify as scaling, and maybe someday. But right now, Alma is exactly what I built it to be. A room where people feel, for 2 hours on a weeknight, like they matter. 40 seats. Named after my grandmother. Lit the way she would have liked. The other day, a line cook on the early shift, she's 22. First restaurant job, wants to open her own place someday. She asked me when I knew it was going to work. When I stopped doubting it, I thought about it for a second. I said, I'm not sure I ever stopped doubting it. I just stopped letting the doubt make decisions for me. She nodded like that made sense. I hope it does. For her, for anyone else who's building something in the dark with no one watching, convince the people who are supposed to believe in them never will. Sometimes they come around. Sometimes they don't. Either way, you keep cooking. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since all of this happened. Not in a mystical way. I don't think the universe was keeping score. I think it's simpler and harder than that. What you put in, quietly, consistently, over time, without anyone watching and without anyone applauding, that's what eventually shows up on the surface. Not because it was destined to. Because you kept showing up when it would have been easier to stop. My father called my restaurant not scalable at a dinner where everyone was celebrating someone else. And he wasn't wrong, exactly. Alma was never going to be a chain. But he was measuring with the wrong ruler. He was measuring for reach when what I was building was depth. Those are different things, and for a long time I let him make me feel like depth didn't count. That was my part in it. I need to be honest about that. I spent years protecting my work from my family's doubt by keeping it separate from them entirely, and while that protected me, it also meant I never gave them a real chance to understand what I was doing. I told myself I was being self-sufficient. Some of it was that. Some of it was fear. Fear that if I shared it and they dismissed it again, I wouldn't be able to shake it off the way I needed to. Marcus never doubted. My grandmother never doubted. The people who had actually watched me work, who had seen the hours and the failures and the adjustments and the stubborn refusal to serve something I wasn't proud of, those people knew what Alma was before any award confirmed it. And I think that's worth sitting with. The people who knew me in the work believed in the work. The people who only knew me at the dinner table did not. That's information about proximity, not about worth. What changed my father wasn't the Michelin star. I think it was coming to Oakland on a Tuesday in khakis he'd had for 15 years and walking through a 40-seat dining room and reading my grandmother's name on the wall and finally understanding what I had been trying to tell him for a decade. Recognition from the outside gave him permission to look. But what he found when he looked was already there. It had been there for years. I think about the line cook who asked me when I stopped doubting. The honest answer is that I haven't, not fully. I still walk into service some nights and wonder if tonight is the night everything falls apart. That feeling doesn't go away. What changes is your relationship to it. You learn that the doubt is just noise and the work is the signal, and you get better at tuning one out and following the other. If you are building something that the people around you don't understand, I'm not going to tell you they'll come around. Some do, some don't. What I can tell you is that their understanding was never the point. The point was always the work itself, what it asks of you, what it teaches you, what it gives to the people you made it for. 40 seats. Named after my grandmother. That was enough. That was always enough. The awards just said it loud enough for everyone else to hear.